Kia ora, welcome back to my channel. My name's Renee. I like to read books and then talk about them on the internet. Hi, hello. I'm here to talk about everything that I read in June. Cannot believe it's already July. It's wild. It's crazy. These years just keep going on by. I read 9 books in June. It's quite a lot, actually. I started off the month by reading quite a few short books. I did a little, I guess, independent of the internet, but a little tiny books challenge. I actually read just one book with my friend Jessica, who was also trying to read tiny books at the same time. So that was nice. I was trying to, just lift that reading goal a little bit, close the gap that I have created in my reading. But it was good. It was a good time. And then I did a vlog of trying to finish a bunch of books that I had started but had not finished, and I managed to achieve that. You can go watch the vlog of that if you like. But yeah, I'm just going to quickly go through everything that I read and what I thought about it. Starting off with Mrs. Caliban by Rachel Ingalls. This is a story about a housewife who harbors a frogman in her home, unbeknownst to her husband. Her and her husband are kind of estranged at that point, both grieving the death of their young son, and the wife has also recently had a miscarriage. So they're kind of independently dealing with that loss on their own at the time, where she takes this fishman in. And you kind of understand why on her part. She's got a lot of kind of care and mothering that she doesn't quite know what to do with, and is searching for someone to apply all that to. And this fishman comes in at the perfect time. She starts taking care of him and hiding him from the authorities. And eventually they kind of fall in love and start bussing, which is very weird. I'm not sure what it is about female characters wanting to fuck fishmen. There's got to be something in there. But yeah, they start doing that. So again, I think that's her misplaced sexual desire. She's feeling very disconnected from her husband, and so she's found this person, this thing, who desires her in that way. And so we have this kind of odd, weird relationship forming between the two of them. Eventually, they make a plan for him to escape so that he can go back home where he came from, somewhere in the Gulf of Mexico, perhaps. And it ends in a car chase, and there's a bunch of drama kind of mixed in through there. It's all round a good time of a novel. It has a good storyline to it. It's odd and strange and quirky in that typical Rachel Ingalls way, where she uses that as her storyline to talk about, these marriages disintegrating, and the, I guess, stereotypical gender roles, and the way that women are often feel isolated within a marriage. So it was kind of fun to read about those types of things that I enjoy reading about, complicated, dysfunctional relationships, and a fun, new type of story. So I enjoyed it. Thought that it was very similar to In the Act, her short novella that I read last year and really loved, and that perhaps those stories do have a connection, or those are topics that she likes to write about, and she definitely does it in a playful, humorous, ridiculous, over the top kind of way. Where are you going?
Yes, ma'am. Which way?
Okay. Okay, the next book I read was Thunderhead by Miranda Darling. This is a debut novel, I believe. Was it a debut? Oh, no, it's not. It's not a debut. Okay, I thought it was. Whoops, my bad. Anyway, this is a new to me author who I randomly discovered at the bookshop. I was very attracted to the cover of that book and didn't buy it then and there, but thought about it a lot and then ended up getting it later on. It is a story of a woman who is an artist. She's a mother, she's a wife, and she is going about her regular day in, I guess, the normal kind of fashion, but in her head is kind of going through everything that she has to do and all the anxieties and worries she has about being a mother and being a writer and how she's going to be able to execute this and do all these things that make her who she is. I got this image while I was reading it of like a swan on a lake, very calm, poised, kind of wanting to appear as though everything is fine when really underneath, frantically paddling away to stay afloat. That's the image that I got while reading this book, and I think the image that was described in the book is very much about a storm brewing, and that kind of brings us to this point at the end of the book that it erupts for this character and it all becomes overwhelming and too much. And yeah, I really got the sense that there were some strong visual descriptions for this character and her state of mind and mental health in this story. I really enjoyed it. It reminded me a little bit of Arlington Park by Rachel Cusk, particularly because it is following a character through one day, whereas Arlington Park you follow many characters, and it also ends in a dinner scene, which, if you haven't heard me talk about it on my channel recently, has become like the thing that I'm noticing in books a lot lately. So I don't know what it means for me, but I'm enjoying it. Dinner parties always tend to have exciting things happen in them. Next I read So Late in the Day by Keegan. This is like a tiny, tiny book. It was about 45 pages. I think I read it in less than an hour. And it was good. I enjoyed it. I'm not a massive fan of Keegan. I've only read one of her other books, to be fair, but I thought that was just okay. She's obviously having a moment at the moment. I think still a lot of her work is being republished and sold, and people can't stop talking about her. I am always apprehensive, reluctant when I hear a lot of people talking about something. But I was willing to give her a go. I gave her a go, and I was like, I don't know if I want to do that again, but I did, and I'm glad I did because I really enjoyed this. I would describe this as a micro story about an Irishman who is mourning the loss of his recently ended engagement and kind of remembering or thinking back over the relationship and certain moments, some tender and sweet and nice, and then others perhaps the pinpointing of that catalyst moment where things may have started to come undone a bit or may have led to the subsequent unengagement, the character moving out. I thought this was done in a really subtle but humorous way. There's a penis cake in the fridge that he has to come at home to because the bachelorette party or the hens party was supposed to be happening. So you get this real sense that something big has happened that has caused this breakdown, and that he is having to be reminded of that in this house that they shared for a brief moment. Also, the character is just kind of appears quite like dull and not very charming, and the character of his fiancée seems like effervescent and beautiful. She's French, and so the pairing, or like him being alone, is just that much more humorous for some reason. I just really enjoyed it. I think that many people have said this, but Claire Keegan is able to economize her words in such a way that does paint these very vivid images and stories that you can really either get lost within, or it's very easy to then paint your own ideas or weave your own stories within them, which was quite fun to do. And in such a short book, I think to be able to put across such a full story is like very, very impressive. Okay, next I read number 91/92 by Lauren Elkin. This is a diary that Lauren Elkin kept on her iPhone over the course of a year as she is traveling on the bus in Paris. It is this decision or this move that she made in order to, I guess, use her phone in a productive way, to not let it distract her from the things happening around her as she is experiencing the public transport system in Paris, and instead use it as this means to write down the things that she notices, the thoughts that she has, the feelings. And so she's doing this across a whole year, and during that time she finds out she's pregnant, and then by the end of the diary we learn that a couple of things have happened. One, there has been serious attack on these journalists from a satirical magazine called Charlie Hebdo. So these journalists were attacked, and that act has kind of shaken up the whole city. Everyone is quite frightened. Yeah, it's kind of just changed Paris a little. And then also during that time, or after she finishes the diary, she finds out she's miscarried, or she's had an ectopic pregnancy, sorry. And so, but these two major events kind of shift the focus of this diary from the mundane, everyday happenings within Lauren Elkin's life to kind of, for her to kind of zoom out a bit more and start to think about the future and kind of those acts and how they make her feel and the consequences they have on her life and her outlook and her perspective. I totally get that. I just do not think that this book was executed that well. I understand what she was trying to do. I just don't know that it was achieved in a very interesting way. I didn't find any of the diary entries all that insightful or interesting. I just found them quite mundane. And one of my biggest issues about mundanity in writing is that I know it's there for a purpose, but there is still something within that can be made interesting, I think. Obviously, I'm not a writer. I don't know what it is like to write, but I know what it is to read something that is interesting. And I think that things can still be interesting and mundane at the same time. I don't know if I've experienced that before, but I'm sure that it's out there somewhere. So if anyone has any recommendations for like mundane, repetitive things that are interesting, let me know. Okay, next I read The Buddha in the Attic by Julie Otsuka. This is a collective kind of group experience fictional novel. It's about a group of women, Japanese women, who are traveling by boat from Japan to the US. They have entered this kind of marriage program where they have been partnered or paired with these Japanese men who have previously settled in America. And these women have signed up for that and been paired off with these men in the hopes or have been sold the dream, the American dream. They believe that they're going to these really prosperous lifestyles, these young, vigorous, handsome men, and so that they're very excited about this kind of new beginning. When they arrive at the airport, it is quickly kind of learnt that they are actually not arriving to what they believe, and that things are very different. They end up working in the fields, they end up working these hard laborious jobs, and the men that they thought they were being married to aren't the same men, they're much older. And so there is this quick understanding that they've been deceived and that the American dream is not real. And we get different kind of aspects of their lives as we go through this. I think the most interesting thing about this book for me is the way that it's written. It's written in this collective we're all in this together, experiencing this. So nothing is ever for that long focused in on one character. You might get a name and a specific detail of an event, but overall these women are all collectively going through this thing together. And so there's this real unity to it that offers some comfort to the reader and to the woman as they're going through this. This idea that at least we're not alone in this. At least I'm not just the only one that has been denied this dream and given this awful reality. I don't think I've ever read anything in that style that has successfully kind of placed it in the right kind of setting. The we collective, the what is it called? The third narrative or whatever, when it's the third person narrative, yeah. But I've often read that when it's been just a single character, but I felt like in this setting it perfectly fit, and I wasn't, put off by it. It felt like being told a collective history of a people from a very specific time and place that felt like right and correct for that situation. Yeah, someone commented on a video of my vlog and said, like, I found that part of it to be quite like monotonous, and like after a while I got quite bored with it, but I felt like the importance of sticking together was a major thing for the story and for those characters. And so I think to break away from that could have broken that promise almost that we felt with these characters. So yeah, I really loved this book, and I loved the way that it was told, and yeah, I thought it was super unique and something that I'll kind of always think about and ponder on. Okay, next I read James by Percival Everett. This is a retelling of the Huckleberry Finn story, something I have never ever read, don't think I ever will, and I'm okay about that. I'm not feel the need to jump into any of like those American classics. So yeah, this is the retelling of that story, but told from the perspective of the slave Jim. And I don't know the Huckleberry Finn story, but I'm assuming Jim is a minor character, and that the focus isn't on him. I'm pretty sure the focus is on Huck. So we are getting a story told from his perspective, what he's going through, and I loved it. I thought it was really great. I thought it obviously felt like it stood alone as a story on its own. I liked this idea of the retelling of a story that was unheard, because there is this ability to not rewrite history, but just tell a different perspective, and one that I think was quite interesting. So Jim, at the beginning of the story, hears that he is going to be sold to someone in New Orleans, and to avoid that, he runs away to a nearby island to kind of hide out and bide his time so he can come up with a better plan. And there he is joined by Huck at some point, who's this young boy. Together they kind of end up on the Mississippi River, and the book is a lot about their kind of misadventures along the way, up and down, trying to figure out what they're going to do, but ultimately get Jim back to his wife and his child. Along the way, we see the character of Jim really develop. We start to understand the responsibilities that he has, the fears that he has, the anger and the frustration. I think one of the obvious things that's done in this book is the way that like superiority or inferiority to that the black characters in this novel have to white folk is done through this play around language, and this language that the black folks speak around the white people in the story in order to make them feel like they are in charge is really funny and makes it interesting to think about. I guess playing a role, playing a character, putting on a mask, appeasing those who are in charge in order to make them feel in charge, that power being based on falsehood was really interesting to think about. There's a lot of discussion around education and Jim's desire to read and write, and I guess his yearning for knowledge is a big focus in the story as well. So yeah, I just found like this was an interesting story overall to tell, and that it offered a more complex, interesting, fully fleshed out version of a character from a historical American piece of literature that was probably very two-dimensional, if not quite flat, a minor character in a story. I really, really loved this. The next book I read was Bradshaw Variations by Rachel Cusk. This is a complicated and comedic family story. We are following the Bradshaw family and their kind of different dynamics. We have a set of parents and then their kind of, three sons and their wives and their kids. And so you have this wider extended Bradshaw family, and then you're focusing in on these children and their lives, and I guess the changes that they're kind of finding themselves in, the interesting shift in dynamics for some of the couples. Some of them are dealing with typical traditional role reversals within the home. Husbands staying at home to look after the children while the wives go to work. You're getting a lot of commentary on that type of typical behaviour, the criticism by the very traditional parents of these family members. You also have other couples who are kind of dealing with, I guess, work as a thing, and the way that the different couples are made responsible for bringing in the money, and the sacrifices that some have made in order to, start the family, and the things that they've had to give up. The story is mostly about those kinds of family life members trying to maybe shift away from more traditional views and become or start their own version of what their family is, while at the same time constantly kind of being judged by the family around them. It's done in that classic Cusk, humorous, clever, witty, smart way that she does. And then there are these really comedic, over-the-top moments within the story that add as like shock, but there is this dry, unapologetic British humour added to it that makes it just hilarious to read. And I find it interesting that this is the last book that Cusk wrote before her outline trilogy, because it feels like a very definitive kind of line has been drawn in the sand after this book, that it was like, I'm not going to write fictional stories like this anymore. So it would be interesting to know if there is anything about her talking about that, because I can definitely see it. This is like the last book, and from here we get very introspective, not very plotty. You barely know details about the characters she writes in her more recent fiction, and this one is kind of the opposite. but still dealing with a lot of the things that Cusk likes to talk about. Family life, complicated relationships, moral decisions. So it's really interesting to see the way that she chooses to present those different things and how clear the line between that old Cusk and the new Cusk is with this novel, I think. Okay, next I read The Hearing Test by Eliza Callahan. This is a debut. This is the book that I was getting confused with, the Thunderhead, but this is a debut. Also reminded me of Cusk. I've been getting a lot of Cusk in my reading lately, both like directly and indirectly. But this is about a woman who wakes up one day to discover that she has gone completely deaf in one ear. This is the story about her trying to gain back that hearing and the questioning she does along the way, the existential questioning of life, of herself, of what she's going to do. She is someone who writes the scores for movies and TV shows, so this is very much this trying to get her hearing back has hinged on her, her other form of well-being, her being able to afford to live and how she earns a living and makes money and that kind of stuff. So we're getting this very practical, well, that's not overly obvious in the story, I don't think. That's not the focus. But there is acknowledgement that that's there, but it's very much this internal liminal space that she is kind of playing in where she isn't sure what's going to happen or whether or not she's going to recover. And so as she is waiting, I guess, or going through the process of doing these tests to see if things are getting worse or better, she is asking herself a lot of questions. I don't claim to know that I got the questions that she was asking herself, but I did sympathize with her a lot. I read this book when I was recovering from my own hearing surgery to gain back my hearing, and I got that feeling of like, is this going to work? Is this going to take, what would happen to me if I lost all my hearing in one ear? What would I do? How would that feel? And so that kind of questioning for that character and her reimagining or redefining things like silence for her was really interesting. And I latched onto that and kind of was able to connect with that. But other parts, not so much. I found some parts of the book were a bit unnecessary and we could have done without the hypnotherapy part of it. But overall, it was like a really nice pace. I read it quite quickly, but it didn't feel like I'd sped through it. It just felt like I'd read it the way it was supposed to be read, but still thinking. And it was a good book to read at that time. I don't know that I would have gotten anything out of it if I hadn't have read it at the time that I read it. The last book that I read in June was Circe by Madeline Miller. This is an adaptation of various Greek myths told through the point of view of the goddess Circe. It is, I guess, like a massive, big old family saga story. You have all of these gods and minor gods mentioned and the different stories that they all bring that are like somewhat familiar, massively aware or connected to Greek mythology, but I recognize a lot of the names and some of the stories brought up. The character of Circe from birth has been kind of outcast. She's been seen as different and not like everyone else, and from there that kind of sets her apart from the rest of her family, and at a different point she is exiled to or banished to another island to live forever on her own. So this novel really explores her kind of origin story, where she's come from, how she is situated within this kind of bigger, wider Greek myth world. And then through her we get these other stories, or we hear about these other stories. So we hear about her encounters with these mythical figures such as Hermes, the story of the Minotaur, which is one that I'm familiar with, which was really interesting to read that. Jason and Medea, which I am also familiar with, but secondhand through Rachel Cusk. Told you, a lot of Rachel Cusk this month, both directly and indirectly. And then the ultimate one's the romance between her and Odysseus, and then Odysseus' son, Telemachus, which I thought was weird. But yeah, this book was fun overall. I won't say that I enjoyed the flowery writing or the highly descriptive stuff. It's not that I'm into. For these kinds of stories, I'm give me the juicy plot. It definitely set me up to want to read some big, interesting world building fantasy novels. And I'm thinking maybe Game of Thrones might be where I'm looking. I just want to read about characters in a world that is really built up. And this definitely reminded me that Greek myth is filled with that. And they're all doing horrible things, and they're all kind of getting away with it. Or it's sport or entertainment. And it's wicked and bad and morally questionable, but it's fun and entertaining. What I want to read more of at the moment. So I will ask you what you think that book could be, possibly for me next. I want good writing though. It has to be good writing, it has to be great story, it has to involve lots of characters, all that kind of stuff. That felt intense. Yeah, a lot of good reading this month. Now that I think back on it, I thought it was just okay, but I think I enjoyed things more than I like to admit. A lot of things that I'm noticing in this month's reading. Isolation, lots of books about people kind of being on their own, being isolated within the home, isolation as a state of mind, being in your own head, all that kind of stuff. Definitely a lot of motherhood themes. Yeah, it was a good time of reading this month. So, here's to more. Let me know what you read this month, what you enjoyed. If you have any recommendations for me, I would love to hear them. I will catch you next time. Bye-bye.